this out of the way so I can see what I'm saying. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. So I imagine most of you are either at your kitchen table, sofa, spare room, loft, or depending where you are in the UK on this lovely day, maybe you're lucky enough to be sat in the garden. I know one of my colleagues certainly is. For those of you that don't know me, my name is James Phone, and I'm a regional distribution manager for Travellers in London and the South. And along with my colleagues, Ian Robinson, Nikki Kelly, and Kerry Bolton, who are also on this call from Leeds, Manchester and Glasgow respectively, we're all responsible for the distribution of all lines of Travellers business and our relationships with our broker partners, so that's you. So we're all here today, as you know, to talk about cyber and hopefully increase your confidence with the subject when talking with your clients. To help this, I'm also joined by Davis Kessler, who is the head of our cyber proposition in the UK and Europe. And we're both talking throughout this webinar today. We also have, you just heard from Amber Mears in our Travellers marketing team. She'll be in the background today as well as Eve, but Amber will be running some of the polls that we'd really like you to get involved in today, if at all possible. So please do participate in the polls. It will give us some good feedback and help with the presentation itself. So, just some legal notices here that you would expect us to point out in terms of the information we're sharing with you. I'm not going to dwell on this slide. I'm just going to go straight in to actually our first poll. So, as many of you can, you should see a poll function appear on your screen. So, on a scale of 1 to 5, can you tell us how confident you are at selling cyber insurance right at this moment in time? If it doesn't work or the poll gets an error message, yeah, we're going to blame Zoom because they're the technology experts here. But you can type your numbered response into the Q&A function. So let's have a look how many people have voted. Wow, we've got 60, nearly 70% so far. And we've got a good range of confidence, if you like. But it's low down on the confidence scale from not confident to the highest score, number 2, not being overly confident. But we've got a very brave person there, or maybe 2 or 3 people who are very confident indeed. So let's see if we can increase your confidence wherever you answered on that poll. And let's get straight into the presentation. So this is what we'll be covering today. Firstly, this cyber landscape and where we've got to today, what environment we're in. Second, we'll spend some time discussing objection handling and some common feedback that we'd expect you're receiving from your clients. Third, and quite scary for me anyway, I'll be doing a live demo and be getting us a cyber quote from our system. So get your stopwatches at the ready. And finally, we'll talk about some of the benefits and enhancements to Travellers' enhanced cyber offering that Amber mentioned right at the start. But for now, I'm going to pass you over to Davis Kessler, sorry Davis, let's call you David, to talk about the cyber landscape. Davis, over to you.
All right, thanks James, and thanks to all of you for dialing in on what at least here a beautiful day. I'm sure there are places you'd like to be, but yeah, we'll talk about, we're going to focus on selling cyber, of course, but I think in selling cyber, of course, knowing what the trends are, what the exposures are, what your clients are facing is, of course, critical in convincing them to take that leap and buy insurance to protect themselves. So what I'm going to focus on at a high level are the trends that we as insurers are seeing the most. So what's leading to paid cyber claims? And it really comes down to 3 main trends. From a kind of a severity standpoint, ransomware has sprung up the ladders and is #1 now. Massive change in the ransomware environment over the last 2 years. And we'll see some of that in the next coming slides. The other thing about ransomware, of course, variation of targets here, you know, cyber kind of had its birth in privacy exposure. And if you weren't retail or financial institutions, you probably didn't think about cyber insurance, but ransomware has kind of leveled the playing field, so to speak, in a bad way, unfortunately, in terms of who has that exposure. It's pretty much everybody right now. So that makes that part easy. Social engineering fraud is kind of the same thing. This is probably with respect to frequency, what we're seeing the most in the cyber landscape. This often follows on a breached email account, phishing scheme, etc., leading to a fraudulent funds transfer. So that also featuring heavily within cyber insurers' paid claims. And then the good old-fashioned data breach. They still happen. We've got a bit ho-hum about them, I think. We see the really big breaches, and with how often they're happening, I certainly get the sense that some people don't even bat an eye anymore. But when it comes to a firm, your clients, and they have to deal with that, it is a very big deal to those firms as they are going through that process, as it impacts their own customers, for example. So it is still a very real and high loss issue. Focusing a bit more on ransomware, you know, it wasn't that long ago, back 2016, 2017, that we saw most ransom payments be, or ransom demands be, in the hundreds of pounds. And the criminals used more of a spray and pray type of attack. We all remember WannaCry infecting over 100,000 computers worldwide. But with respect to how much money was demanded to get the keys to unlock that ransomware, it was only $300 US in Bitcoin. Fast forward just a couple of years, and that has changed dramatically. The chart on the right comes from security firm Coveware and shows a nearly 10-fold jump in the average ransom payment just in the last 5 quarters. So this has become tremendously problematic in this area. It's hitting firms of all different types, all different classes of business, as I mentioned earlier. The reason that the trend has gone the way it is just that the criminals have become very good at infiltrating firms, again, usually starting from a breached email account or an open port. There's a couple open ports in particular that criminals can actually scan the internet and find who has these ports open. And it's basically just a backdoor for the criminal to get in. Once they're in, instead of just dropping a ransom file and demanding, you know, a small amount of money, the criminals are now sitting there and learning their targets better, figuring out when to strike, how much they can demand, and so on. So, you know, we've seen just a tremendous spike in the amounts of ransom demanded and paid. The other thing, just the sophistication of the software itself has become much more problematic. Whereas before, you know, you may get a locked up system, maybe it was just a couple endpoints or maybe just the one computer that they got access to. Now, more often the case, they can get in and then spread horizontally through the company's network, infecting other servers, backup servers, and so on. So yeah, ransomware is a call to action for all companies. We just saw in Australia, actually, the government's said there's been a wave of ransomware attacks there. So it's not just a US phenomenon, it's definitely expanding around the globe. Another trend we've seen with respect to ransomware is using managed service providers as a conduit to get to multiple firms. So criminals, unfortunately, aren't dumb. Well, maybe some of them are, but a lot of them are very industrious, and they've realized that managed service providers, which are basically outsourced IT providers or even IT security providers, can basically hold the keys to the back door for multiple firms. So the figures on the left come from a robust survey that the UK government does every year called the Cyber Breaches Survey. It's 1,400 respondents, so it's a good snapshot of all industries, all sizes of firms as well. And you can see a good number of firms use managed service providers, up to 2/3 for medium-sized firms. So this is a very real threat. If one of those managed service providers gets infiltrated, again, the criminal then can basically have backdoor access and drop the ransomware on all of their customers. We've started to see this pop up on many occasions recently, and it doesn't look like it's going away. Social engineering fraud probably doesn't need any introduction for any of you guys on the call. This is something we've been dealing with for a bit longer than the ransomware, of course, but in the grand scheme of things, still a fairly recent trend. But you all know what it is. The thing I want to focus more on is the unfortunate consequences that come on the cyber side. So we know that these criminals are gaining access to emails. You know, that they'll fish an employee, get access to their email, set up automatic searches and hidden folders and so on and so forth. But what they're really looking for are invoices, discussions about upcoming financial transactions that they can then pretend to be one of the parties, say that their bank details have changed. We all know how it goes, right? We know that's what the criminal's after. Unlike the ransomware, here they're in for that quick financial hit. They want to get in, get the information, and cause a fraudulent funds transfer. Unfortunately, when they're in there, they're looking at confidential information. Every email account, even the most professional business email account, is going to have private information on there, whether that be about customers of the business or that business account used for personal emailing. It's going to have login information for that user's various other accounts elsewhere, banking accounts, whatever it may be. All of that, if the criminal had access to it, is a potential privacy breach under GDPR that needs to be notified. So you've got the immediate hit of the funds transfer fraud, and that's what we all know and see and read about. But then you've also got the requirement to potentially bring in IT forensics firms or lawyers that are going to or assess whether you have exposure under GDPR and need to provide notification. So the funds fraud is unfortunately the tip of the iceberg in many of these situations.
Yeah, David, so I was just going to add to that. Actually, just think about it in your personal life. How many user IDs and logins that use your personal email address that you might have for either apps, shopping, Netflix, insurance, holidays, etc. I had a quick sort of tot up this morning. It's quite scary. I've got around over 150 logins that use my email address. Yeah, check yours, and how many businesses use different types of logins as well. It's quite a scary sort of subject, and as David says, it's a way into the back door.
Yeah, and then just touching again briefly on the other main trend that we've seen, and that's just going back to privacy breaches. You know, that's why cyber insurance was initially born, and it's still very much a real coverage and exposure that firms have. As we trade more and more online, particularly in the current environment, of course, the exposure is increasing, and the risks of even an inadvertent data breaches, you know, sending an email to the wrong person, that could be a privacy breach, and it could be a noticeable one under GDPR, depending on what was included. These are not going to go away, plain and simple. You know, if your firm, if your client has employee data, if they have customer data, if they hold any financial records, these are and forever will be a cause of a potential loss. You can see here information released by the Information Commissioner's Office on the number of data-related complaints and data breach reports. So a data-related complaint isn't necessarily about a privacy breach, but could include things like failure to get authorization to obtain information, or failure to destroy information about a person if they request that, and so on. Those were actionable items in many cases before GDPR went into effect under the old Data Protection Act. But GDPR made people much more aware of their rights. So even though GDPR in a lot of senses didn't add any requirements, you can see the noticeable impact it had on the number of complaints to the ICO's office. Same thing with data breach reports. So, you know, a lot of firms, even before GDPR went into effect, had a responsibility to provide notice of breaches. And you can see some there, but post GDPR, just a tremendous spike, going up nearly fivefold after that went into effect.
Okay, so that's a bit about the landscape we find ourselves in at the moment. So now let's move on to objection handling. So let's have another quick poll. Same as before, please use the poll on your screen when you see it. And if it doesn't work, type in your response in the Q&A function. What are the biggest blockers when it comes to selling cyber? So let's see how we're responding. So encourage all of you to respond, please. It will just help us with helping you. Interested in seeing all the responses coming through. A third of you have voted so far. Keep it going for a few more seconds. Wow, we're up to 55. Let's get it to 60%. A few more voting. Okay, so overwhelming in that short poll and short time scale. Right at the top, the client does not think they're exposed, and the client does not understand what cyber insurance covers. So let's move on to how we address those. Davis, this is your one.
Yeah. So yeah, really interesting responses. It's pretty bang on with what we've seen in other webinars that we're doing. The thought that, particularly among smaller firms, that they aren't a target or it's not going to happen to us, that is always the most frequent one we see. And unfortunately, as I hope we're starting to paint the picture, that's not the case. So all firms are exposed, all sizes, all types of industries. The second one there that you guys had noted is also the one I highlight on this screen, and that's the lack of awareness, you know, about cyber insurance. And to me, that's where, you know, us as the insurance industry, you know, us talking to you guys about, and gals, about what cyber insurance protects, how it works, how it responds to an event, and then you passing that information and having those discussions with your client. So, you know, that's what we're hearing. So it's good to see that, you know, that's pretty consistent, but it's an area that I think we all agree that we need to add some improvement, because if you look on the right-hand side, the actual take-up of dedicated cyber insurance is still remarkably low. Even for larger firms, it's only 1 out of every 5 firms that are buying a true dedicated cyber policy. Those figures are roughly doubled that, around 30% amongst small and medium businesses, of having some sort of cyber insurance, period, full stop, even. I forget where I am sometimes. You know, that kind of add-on policy may be better than nothing. It's a bit of some money at the end of the day, but it's not going to have the breadth of coverage as a dedicated cyber policy. It's not likely going to have any breach response element tied to it. Certainly risk management probably isn't part of the mix. So full protection really needs to be a dedicated cyber policy. So James is going to go through some of the objections and some talking points that may help to get through them.
Yeah, thanks, Davis. So as Davis said, many clients, or industries still don't buy cyber insurance. So why is that? So here's a list of common objections to cyber. Some of them you may have heard before, and hopefully by the end of this webinar you'll be at least a little more confident to talk about and overcome some of these objections. So let's see if we can cover each one of these in turn. So the first one, only large organisations are targets, myth or fact? Well, the key fact here is that small and mid-sized firms are just as exposed to data breaches as large firms are. Now, we're using the same survey here, the UK Government Cyber Breach Survey for 2020 that was only released in March. And if you look at this graph here in terms of sizes of business, just based on number of employees, if you average out the response, around 50% of businesses report to having a security attack in the last 12 months. So really the question is for your clients, is it worth taking a 50-50 chance whether they're going to be hit by a cyber event of some form in the future? All the current trends and surveys from other sources sort of point in the same direction of all businesses being at some form of high risk. So obviously larger and well-known firms are the ones we see in the headlines, as David said, and often, but not always, they have the insurance, capital and infrastructure to recover from those events. But most smaller businesses are unlikely, and especially after the economic effect of COVID, to have that sort of backup already in their business. So a good example of that actually is there's a long established sort of example that's on the BBC website. There's a little video about it as well, about a hairdressing salon in Scotland. For them, they couldn't open this was prior to COVID, probably about a year ago, they couldn't open their doors to trade for 4 weeks following a ransomware attack in demand. Their phone system, client booking system and tills were all interconnected via the same system. And that's just an example of where you can have a massive impact on a business. So this one, I like this one. Our systems are state of the art, myth or fact? So quite simply, state of the art doesn't actually ensure security. So I've got a question here, which is not a poll, just something to think about. When was the last time you forgot to lock your door at home or on your car, or put the alarm on at your home if you have one, or update the latest security software on your phone or your laptop at home? Another misconception is that state-of-the-art systems are protected. Even though we have security software on our personal PCs, etc., as just said, we regularly get updates from the supplier. This is because new threats are constantly emerging and the network infrastructure and systems are only as good as the latest known threat. So what about threats we don't even know about? How can any system protect against the unknown? But even if you do have the best alarm system on your property, if we're just talking about property and not cyber, an employee can forget to lock the door or leave the windows open. And some of the first well-published instances were back in the 90s and 2000s, we all know about, heard about. Leaving a laptop on the train, loss of a USB memory stick with 10,000 client details on it. Today, it's more around if a business owner leaves their phone in the car or on a train, that could potentially have access to a number of business systems through it. So as we see on the chart here, employees are often the biggest threat to data security, either through inadvertent action or even accidentally sending an email to the wrong address. A good example of a client we heard of that thought he had up-to-date state-of-the-art systems was a haulage contractor. He was adamant that his systems were secure. But not long after that conversation, a bit further on in the future, he lost his laptop, his systems were hacked, he didn't know where his vehicle fleet or deliveries were for 2 weeks, and it had a massive impact on his business and reputation 1 year later. So just having the best system is no guarantee of safety. So most, as you see here, most breaches are opportunistic and not targeted. The victim isn't specifically targeted, but they were identified and attacked because they exhibited a weakness the attacker knew how to exploit. And most breaches aren't perpetrated by highly sophisticated criminals, although we did mention some sophisticated attacks earlier. So in other words, this can happen to anyone. Most companies don't expect that they will be a target, but hackers find it relatively quick and easy to penetrate most secure networks, and being opportunistic, they go after anyone that is vulnerable. So consider how to put this into perspective. Attackers are looking for opportunities to exploit low-hanging fruit where they don't have to work too hard to get in, and they can do so very quickly. Conversely, it takes businesses quite a while to find out this is actually happening, as Davis had mentioned earlier, so the attacker could be having fun inside a system for a matter of months, maybe even years, before anyone learns that something has happened. And as a final nail in the coffin, it's often a third party that tells them that something's wrong, and it was not their own discovery. A great example of this is that I actually worked for an insurer a few years back that will remain nameless. And one morning, the claims team got several emails from the same broker asking to change payment details on a few ongoing claims from different clients. Suffice to say, we had to tell the broker they had been hacked, which was an embarrassing conversation, more for them than it was for us. Okay, another objection. We outsource our data, so we're okay, myth or fact. Well, it's not that easy. So as you'll see, the client is ultimately responsible for their own data, and they can't outsource that responsibility at all. Davis, this is one that you like to talk about. So I'll hand over to you here in terms of this part.
Yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. So if a company collects data for their own purposes, they'll be deemed the data controller under GDPR. Whether they use a third party to actually go out and collect that data. So by way of example, a lot of times if you use a chat feature on a website, that may not be chatting with an employee at British Airways, for example. It may be an employee of a third company. That data is still collected on behalf of British Airways in that example, and they would be the data controller under GDPR. Similarly, if you then relinquish that data into a third-party cloud database, for example, you're still going to be ultimately responsible under GDPR if there's a breach, even if that breach is not your fault at all. So one thing I like to mention here is yeah, you may have some access to indemnity against that third party if they are the source of the breach. But there's really two things that I think you should be mindful of, or your clients should be mindful of when doing that. One, these firms are often, massive companies that hold a lot of different firms' data, and you'll be signing a contract that tries to limit the amount of indemnity that you can seek as much as possible, or put certain bounds around it. So you may not have as broad a right to indemnity as you initially thought. Similarly, and for some, same reason really, if one of these firms has a breach, odds are they've breached multiple customers' information. So by way of example, a tech provider here in the UK was used by nearly 200 law firms for holding data, and they had a breach, and data from all those firms was unprotected and accessible online. In that instance, hopefully there hasn't been any significant data breach or the information too sensitive, but nevertheless, that's a lot of firms that may be seeking indemnity all at once. And the pockets may not be deep enough, so to speak, in terms of making whole all of those customers. So
yeah, so good. Yeah, sorry, Davis. I was just going to back that up with perhaps another example. So we did have an example of a wholesale baker that outsourced his point of sale and online order system that also linked to stock control to a payment processor. The payment processor had a ransomware attack where all of their client details, including the bakers, were encrypted. The baker was responsible for contacting his own clients and to manage that situation along with all the fallout to his business and his reputation, just to reinforce that. So, yeah, that's another area where you should be able to introduce some questioning to your client. So moving on to one of the final ones, we can handle the cost of the breach. If you think the cost of coverage is expensive, let's get your client to try dealing with a security breach. Davis is another one of your favourite topics in terms of the list of things that could be.
Well, I don't know if it's my favorite topic, but
certainly one I can speak to. Yeah, so, you know, I think we see the really big events, right? Everybody reads about the British Airways, the Marriott breaches, and fines like, you know, over £100 million. That gets kind of back to the first objection. It's not going to happen to us. But one of the things you don't see is just kind of what does that attritional loss look like to a smaller firm? You know, maybe they had a couple emails breached, had to bring in some forensics, had to bring in some legal help. You know, that doesn't make the news, unfortunately. But I can assure you that it does add up. So, you know, a cyber breach response is very front loaded. It may happen on a Friday afternoon, and the entire breach response process, it could be nearly wholly done by the end of the weekend. Because it's so critical, because it's so urgent, you're going to want to get in the right experts, and trust me, the right experts cost a good amount of money. So the IT forensics provider is going to charge multiple hundreds of pounds per hour. The law firm, as we all know, are going to charge multiple hundreds of pounds per hour. If there has been a breach and your notification requirements under GDPR are triggered, there's the potential of call centers, the actual notification itself, so legal costs to draft it, the means of sending it out. Credit monitoring may have to be set up if financial data has been impacted. These all add up really quickly. One of the things later on we're going to show you through a online tool that we and our broker partners have access to, and our insureds, gives a good example of the costs of breaches that have been insured. So you can, well, we'll get there in a bit, so I'll leave that for now. But needless to say, these costs can add up. Certainly if you bring in ransomware, we know that's going up exponentially. Social engineering fraud, of course. But just that breach response cost itself will add up quickly.
So let's give you another example to sort of put it into real terms. I mean, reputational damage is one of the hardest to quantify. It's on there. It's often one of the largest as well. So got an example here of a small engineering firm making components on an industrial estate, sort of place that most of you will know well around the UK. The managing director visited a local coffee shop regularly to get his caffeine fix, and often brought his laptop with him to log into Wi-Fi and do a little bit of work while he was there. He logged into his emails whilst having a coffee one day, not knowing that the Wi-Fi was fake at that time. His email system was duplicated in real time there and then, and an email was sent to his financial director back at the firm saying something on the lines of, "John, I forgot to send that payment to ABC suppliers before I left. Can you log on to the bank and send a payment of £150,000 to ABC?" Now, the email was signed off with a nickname that the financial director called his boss, so he had no reason to not believe it wasn't him. So the result of that was obviously social engineering, and the fraudulent emails and subsequent payment was that were made out of the account was well over £200,000 in the end. So this gives you an example of some of the places that guys can hack in. So we're already covered for cyber events. Myth or fact is another thing to sort of cover off. And I would imagine, like us, many of you have come across instances where clients believe they are covered with their existing management liability policy, for example. So what we've got on the screen here, as we've seen, according to sort of different sources, only around one third, nearly a quarter of businesses actually have cyber cover. But for those that do have it in place already, that's great, because most cyber policies in the market are robust, but there's no standardization, and it's important to understand the limitations of any given policy. So above on the screen now are just a few limitations that some of you or your clients may think are more important than others. So not all policies are created equal, as you'd expect, and it's usually pretty easy actually to determine what is covered. And we've got a great tool to help you with this in our broker sales pack that we'll show you later on. So time for a quick poll. As it says, how important is quotation speed to win sale for you? As before, let's see how important this is to you. So I encourage you to vote, be interactive at this part. We'll carry on for a few more seconds. So nearly half of you have voted already. Let's have a little bit more than that. Let's get up to about 70%. So please do vote. So, okay. Pushing up to 60%. So get to 60. One more. Come on, one more vote. Okay, that's it. We'll leave it there. So great. Thank you for that. So a lot of you think it's important. 3, 4, or 5 in terms of your answers. A few of you think it's less important. So let's see if I can help with that. So this is where I put myself under more pressure than I'm at the moment, because where I am it's really hot. If you can see me, I'm starting to sweat. That's only because of the heat, by the way. So what I'm going to do is hopefully take you onto our e-trading platform, and you can time me if you want, but there will be a timer on the screen. I'm going to see if I can get a quote for you. So bear with me for 2 seconds while I move some things out of the way and drag the screen in. So some of you will be familiar with this section called My Travellers. Basically, I'm going to go into our system and attempt, it allows me to log in to get a quote. So first of all, you'll see this screen that asks you to put in the insured's details. So time down at the bottom there is 14:39. See if I can do this really quick. So just going to type in X, Y, Z and search. So this will search company's house for you if you already have the client's details or company number. There we are, I'll use that one there, XYZ PVT Limited. And it'll pre-fill the client's address, their activities, if it's there, along with their year of incorporation. So let's select the activities that they do. Wholesale, let's use wholesale flowers and plants. It's got to put in their turnover, so let's put in, I don't know, 4 million turnover. Year of incorporation is already there. They're a limited company, and save and continue. As you can see, there's a bar at the top that takes you from left to right. I'll scroll back up the top just to show you. This is obviously how far away we are from getting the quote. What you'll see, this is part of our management liability platform, so you can actually quote for D&O and crime. But for cyber in isolation, which we're talking about, we look at limits. So let's just put a relatively small limit in there of 250,000. Agree the material facts. Number of employees, 11 to 50. Number of locations, so we've got 3. Agree. When would you like the policy to start? Let's say the 1st of July. 12 months. Save and continue. So what it should do now is, as quick as possible, while I'm talking, it should come up with a quote immediately on the screen for you. So we're still within 2 minutes. So what you can see here is down at the bottom, you've got a summary of the cover, £478, and the commission. And this is on our system ready for you. So we've got PDF copies of the actual quote itself for the insured. So if you clicked on that, you'll see a PDF copy, which shows a breakdown of the quote. And I close that, come back here. You've also got a broker version, policy wording. You can email that quote to you, copy it as plain text and put in your report if you need to. And there's a summary of the quote here. Bit controversial, you can put commission in here that would default to a standard commission level for your agency, but it allows you to reduce it if you want to, as you can see at the bottom. changes all the numbers, and you can save that. But from here on in, you just have to, so I'll save the changes, just to finish off. All you need to do now to go on cover is confirm cover. So I've done that while I was talking, and that was less than 3 minutes from start to finish. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how quick and easy it is to quote for cyber. So moving on, in fact, one question before I go. Are you putting a cyber quote out there with all of your renewals? Is a question just to pose to yourself, not to answer online. And just think about protecting your PI. Do you want a client saying, my broker never told me about the risks associated with cyber, considering it's that simple to get a quote? So another poll, what do you and your clients want to see from carriers in a cyber proposition? So what would you like to see? So there's a poll coming up on your screen now. We've got one more poll after this, so don't worry too much, but please do participate. Let's see what you're saying, so we're getting the right thing. That's it. Many more of you voting now. So wow, most of you. We'll give another 5 seconds to get it over 50% of you. Anytime there, Amber, you probably close the poll if you want to. Looks like all of the above. The vast majority of you looks at broader coverage, risk management, breach response, clear documentation, etc. So let's tell you a little bit more about our product enhancements in the last 20 minutes of this presentation. So Davis, I'm going to come back to you for this part.
Yeah, thanks. So
Full disclosure, that last poll was totally leading. We wanted to talk about some of the enhancements that we brought into the policy, but you know, we really had been listening to what our broker partners were saying that their clients want, that your clients want, and have added that in. So we've just recently gone through a product refresh. Some of you probably already have received some documentation on that. And two of the areas that we really brought in, really focused on, are the coverage itself, which is broadening, and also the risk management material that is now available to our insureds. So from a coverage standpoint, don't have time to talk about the whole policy, but I'll hit on a few of the highlights that we've added. If you want to just click onto the next screen, we've added some new coverage altogether. We've enhanced some existing coverages, and even where we haven't made a change to the scope of coverage, we've tried to make the policy as readable as possible. So hopefully it's accessible to you and your clients. But in terms of what's new, we now have social engineering fraud as standard within the policy. So all customers will qualify for that if they qualify for the policy as a whole. We've added a coverage called vendor and client payment fraud, which is very similar to social engineering fraud, but instead of the insured having an employee get duped, an employee of one of the vendors or clients of the insured is the party that got duped. We've added reputational harm. So we've already mentioned that, you know, a cyber event can certainly cause a negative reputational hit in the press. Previously, that would have required there be a computer interruption to trigger the business interruption coverage. However, we've added reputational harm, which just says if you've had a privacy breach or a security breach, and you lose customers as a result, for example, the policy will step in and pay that income differential. A new coverage that we've added that, to my knowledge, is still unique to the Travelers product is our betterment coverage. It's not unique by name, which maybe is my fault, but it does act differently than most other betterment coverages that you can find out there. Those would typically say, if you've had software or hardware that was damaged in a cyber attack, and policy typically makes, replaces with same software or hardware, but that is no longer available. Maybe a new version is out there. We'll step you up to that new version. We will still do that in our policy, but we actually go above and beyond that and say, if you've had a breach and a piece of software, piece of security software, piece of hardware that you didn't have at all would have helped prevent that attack from happening, or will help prevent a future similar attack from happening, we'll actually go in and help you pay for that brand new piece of software or hardware. So it's true betterment, not just an improvement of existing coverage that or software or hardware that the insured had. Some enhancements to existing coverages, mainly focusing around business interruption. So we've added triggers for system failure. So instead of a malicious attack causing your client's computers to go down, it's instead a human error or a programming error, etc. That will now trigger the business interruption coverage. We've added a voluntary shutdown trigger. So if an event is happening and in order to mitigate the damage, the IT department, for example, decides it's best to actually purposefully shut down your own equipment, that will now trigger business interruption coverage. Bricked equipment, we call it non-functional equipment. Basically, this says if computer equipment has been physically damaged or rendered unusable because of a cyber attack, that will now be covered. That's up to full limit. And then accounting costs. If there has been a business interruption event, we will pay up to $50,000 for the insured to go out and hire an accountant to put together, an accountant of their choosing, I should add, to put together their claim for business interruption loss. Where there are sublimits in the policy, mainly crime and dependent business interruption, we have generally increased those across the board as standard. We can, of course, consider increasing those further. That would have to come to an underwriter, so reach out to the team. And another key feature we're adding for some SME insureds is so long as the turnover of the proposer is under 50 million, we are attaching an endorsement that waives the excess for the breach response coverages, so long as notification has been given within 72 hours of discovery. So really this is to encourage that prompt notification to us in these events, because again, as I mentioned earlier, these are real-time critical situations. We haven't really made much change to our breach response proposition, but that's because we feel we have the best, plain and simple. We are top 4 cyber carrier globally. We've handled hundreds, if not thousands, of claims. We've got connections with all of the top providers in terms of forensics providers, PR firms, Pinson Masons for our breach coach, our legal team. We really feel that we have the best, or certainly one of the best out there. So that is still there. That's still a benefit to our insureds. The other major area that we've improved, as I mentioned, are risk management material for the insured. This is really through 2 different means. So we've partnered with Net Diligence to create an e-risk hub that houses a lot of information that the insured can make use of really at their own choosing. So up here on the top, it's got up-to-date news. It's got a learning center that'll have some, sample incident response plans and so on. Link to the experts. The things I really want to focus on, though, and what can really help you out as well, and our broker partners can get access to this e-risk hub. So if you want that access, reach out to us, are the claim scenarios that James is going to click on here. So once he's logged in, so Net Diligence is probably the biggest aggregator of insurance, cyber insurance claim data. So they have a big database that's quickly growing. It is very US heavy at this point, just because cyber insurance has traditionally been in the US so far, but it is growing. They are adding more and more international claims as well. So yeah, you can put in the parameters that you want here, and then you get a list. And so you can see here, James, I don't know, it was like 170 claims just within that grouping. But if you click on one, you get a bit of detail about what the claim was. In this case, it's not a very long description, but the nice thing is it breaks down the different amounts paid so that you can see the different pieces that make up that total loss. This is what I was mentioning earlier. So, you know, forensics, you know, this was a social engineering fraud event. Looks like it cost under the other, just guessing that was the funds transfer, 62 grand to the client. Obviously that hurts, but probably what they didn't think was they were going to get hit with 50K of forensics. In this case, they had a bit of notification costs, legal costs, more than doubling the actual amount of social engineering fraud. So just goes to show that, yeah, it's far more than that funds transfer. Just looking at another example, just, you know, here, a ransomware event, bit more information. Some of them provide more description than others in terms of the background. But here, you know, again, forensics costs. We have business interruption costs on this one. None of them disclose if or the amount of ransom paid, as that would obviously be pretty sensitive. They're all anonymized, but nevertheless, they don't have that information. So a lot of good stuff on the eRisk Hub. eRisk Hub is also the access point for the other big piece of risk management material that we're adding, if you want to, yeah. So we've partnered with Symantec, obviously a well-known firm in the cybersecurity space, to provide a few key benefits to our insureds. So the first thing available is a cyber readiness self-assessment that the insured can take, and that will return a number of, you know, an analysis of the insured security posture and their resiliency posture. It will provide some guidance on how improvements can be made. The second key benefit with Symantec is all of our insureds have access to a 1-hour consultation free of charge with a cybersecurity professional at Symantec. So what we would recommend is the insured complete that readiness assessment and then talk over those results and get that live personal guidance on how to better improve their security. The other main key benefit here is a series of online cloud-based learning management modules that the insured's employees can take. This is far better. It's not just a series of videos, although we do have that as well, that your employees can go take a look at and learn about phishing, learn about the dark web. But this is actually a live management system. Some of you may have seen this in your own firms, where someone at the insured, an IT manager or an HR manager, will have an actual dashboard that they can register the employees, see when they've logged in, see, you know, if each module will have a test at the end, see if they've passed that test, for example. So you can actually evidence a progression and the education of your employees. And then finally, Symantec has a lot of other services that can be taken advantage of, and being a traveler's insured, they can get a discount to some of those. So ton of information that we just dropped on you. Luckily, our marketing team has done a phenomenal job at culling all of this and putting it into a bunch of information that is accessible to all of you. So on our website, James gets back to that. So this will be in a link that we send out following the presentation. So don't try to write it all down real quick. But within here, we have a document called our broker sales pack. And this is really a collection of everything that we've heard requested from you to help you sell cyber, particularly with an aim at first-time buyers who may be hesitant to take that first-time purchase. So this document has claim examples. It has really good descriptions of what is honestly a complicated policy. We all know cyber is complicated. It has over 20 insuring clauses. We've got a document in here that breaks down each insuring clause, gives an example of a scenario that may trigger each one, and then a description of how the policy will respond. What's in front of you now is a comparison against other markets. This is highlighting our training available. That's just our.
I'll go down to the bottom. Just bear with me. I can't scroll too fast because it's below people's eyes.
That just past some specific claim studies to give a bit more detail on how the policy responded, how much was covered on certain claims. This is a document that we'd encourage you to sit down with your clients and walk them through. It really highlights some areas that would trigger cyber exposure that a lot of people don't think about, like the fact that you may have health insurance or health information about your own employees. People often forget about their own employees as being a potential for a privacy breach. So, we listened. We heard from our broker partners that they wanted assistance in selling cyber to first-time buyers, and we really hope we've come through with some materials that help you out. And lastly, we were going to hit on our appetite real quick. I know we do have a couple questions, but just real quick. Generally speaking, our appetite's very broad for cyber. The only major area that's a out of appetite at this point is healthcare. We're working on that. We do write healthcare in the U.S., so it's something that we're comfortable with. We just need to make sure we've got it right for the UK market. We have some corporate restrictions. Security and defense firms are out. Tobacco is out. Marijuana. But generally speaking, we have a very broad appetite. The ones that are with the play button, if you will, those will flow through the portal that James just showed you without any restriction whatsoever, unless it triggers by turnover or the limit requested. The ones in the top right, we have an appetite for, but they will trigger referral for reasons that are probably obvious, a bit more complicated type of scenarios. On technology, it's worth noting that we have a dedicated global technology team that can offer cyber in addition to tech PI and other package coverages altogether. So we just want to make sure that we're finding the right home for these clients in to meet their needs.
So guys, final poll, please, before we all allow you to escape and enjoy the sunshine and perhaps cool down a bit. So please, can you just tell us how confident are you now of introducing cyber into conversation with your clients and selling cyber? So we'll give it a few, we're bang on 3 o'clock now, so we'll give it a little bit more to, okay, close the poll, Amber, just for time's sake. So whatever, 62% of you. So looks like your confidence levels have improved somewhat. We've got a few more that are very confident, and we only started off with 1 or 2, and it looks like we've moved you up a level. So that's what we wanted to achieve today, to just give you some confidence around cyber, introducing the concept, and also overcoming objections with a little bit of our enhancements added onto it. So we're going to try to answer those questions that may have been there already.
Yeah, we've got 4 open questions in the Q&A function.
Okay.
If you
Yeah, I can take the first one's definitely worth discussing. I know some of you may have to leave, and if I don't get to a question, by all means, reach out to me. But the first question is what level of insurance to recommend to your clients? And that's a question I get asked quite a bit, actually, and it's obviously a very important one. Here, there's really 2 approaches I would recommend. One, our lowest limit we offer is 100K. But critically, we don't differentiate all of the other benefits that a policyholder gets based on the limit purchase. So even that 100K option is going to get access to the pre-vetted breach response providers. So you've got that team that can react within hours
to an event and get your client back up on their feet as quickly as possible. The risk management materials are available to all of our insureds regardless of limit purchase. So certainly dipping your toes in and getting that 100K option is going to be far better than not purchasing any cyber at all. In terms of, is 100K enough? Even for SMEs, that may not be enough. I mean, we saw the average ransom payment itself is now over 100K. So certainly if ransomware is involved, that 100K limit is probably going to be exceeded. Generally speaking, if there's a privacy breach, even at the SME level, you know, there's no hard and fast rule. I can't disclose our average amounts paid, but 100K is probably the starting place when we're talking about a privacy breach, unless it's really minor. You know, one email account maybe will get contained within that. So even for SMEs, I think £1 million limit is going to be a good level of security. And then, you know, going up from there, depending on certainly the size of the firm, the amount of sensitive information held, the type of information held, etc. So yeah, that's a good one. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm just going to say, if anyone needs to go, because we've sort of hit the hour mark. Nikki's contact details, Nikki, Ian and Kerry from your local offices are on there, and on the screen here we've got Lisa E. Davis. The contact details are there, but we thank you very much for your time, considering we're 3 minutes over. And yes, thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone.